Hi everybody, welcome to the Lost Oak Winery. My name is Zach Shelley. Welcome to 605 Lost Oak Live. Today we have a little cooking session with an executive chef, Scott Doherty with DCaterers out of Alvarado. And Scott, introduce yourself, a little background on yourself to our audience for what we're cooking today and what we're having and the prep and everything that's going in.
Absolutely. The prep's already done. My name is Scott Doherty. I'm a career executive chef. I run a small catering company here out of Alvarado called DCaterers. And I also run, until the COVID-19 scare, we were doing the Night with the Chef at the end of every month here at the Lost Oak Winery. And hopefully we'll get that back going as soon as circumstances allow us to do that. Kind of missed the fun of that. It was a much larger experience. So what we're going to be doing tonight real quick is an a la minute dish. We're going to be doing a chicken scallopini with a Madeira sauce, a Madeira cream sauce with some fettuccine and some sauteed asparagus and tomatoes. What I've laid out in front of me is all the prep. I think they posted the recipe online already. Did they not? So for those of you who are watching, if you're looking at the recipe, you see all the ingredients are already done out, and this is pretty much what they look like, all done up. You know, in the recipe it calls for the asparagus to be cut into 2-inch pieces, which are about like that. You know, the quartered tomatoes like this. Portobellos, it says in the recipe that you can remove the fins, you wash them and slice them down, and the parsley's chopped. Chopped and cleaned. In the recipe, I give instructions for cleaning the parsley, and most people at home don't understand what a term like that is. Those of us in the food service industry know what it means to clean parsley. Generally what you're doing, no matter what kind of parsley, whether it's a curly parsley or a flat Italian parsley, you take it and you chop it up however fine you want it. You want a rough chop, you want a thin chop, and then you're going to take that parsley and then you're going to put it in a linen, preferably a linen napkin. I would recommend something dark in color because sometimes if you use a white, the parsley will stain the white linen. And what you do is you take that and you bundle it up like a sack, and then you twist it up, and then you take that and you run it under cold water, and squeezing it as you're doing that, let it run, get some water going through and you squeeze it, and all that water is going to come through green. And what that's doing is that's washing away the chlorophyll and the plant starches in the parsley. And it does several things, actually. It extends the life of the chopped parsley. If you're going to do a lot of it and keep it in your refrigerator, it'll last up to about a week. You probably want to keep it uncovered in the refrigerator. The other thing it does is it brightens the color up. There's the starches, as they oxidize, they tend to get dark and gummy and they start to look not that great. So it brightens that up. And the other thing that it does is it get the starch away. The parsley doesn't stick. So you can get that nice sprinkle thing where you see, you know, that old school thing where chefs, take that parsley and sprinkle around it. Well, that's what they're doing. Is that clean parsley is the only way you can do that. Otherwise, if you do that and you haven't washed your parsley, you're going to get clumps of parsley on your plate. So what we have, we have our chicken, and we have the fettuccine, we have our vegetables. In this particular instance, the fettuccine that I'm using, I'm using actually, I purchased fresh refrigerated pasta versus dried pasta. And when you cook this, you have to kind of address it a little different. You're not cooking dried pasta. Dried pasta, especially fettuccine, can take 5, 8 minutes, 10 minutes sometimes in boiling water. Fresh fettuccine takes about 2, if that. And when you cook this, you want this in a pot or something that you can drain it off real fast, and then you want to have a bowl of ice water ready to go. Not just ice, it has to be a mixture of ice and water. You want to take that and drain that pasta off and dump it directly into that ice water, and that immediately stops the cooking process. It's called shocking. Okay, that's also what you do with green vegetables. In the case in the recipe, it says to blanch and shock the asparagus, and that's exactly what you're doing. The same process. You're dropping that asparagus, whether you steam it or you're boiling it or whatever you do. You're dropping there. You cook it for just long enough for it to start getting pliable, or al dente as we call it, and then you're going to take that off the heat and immediately dump that right into the ice water. And that immediately stops the cooking process. If you don't drop it into the ice water and you just kind of take it off the heat and let it sit, it's going to continue to cook. So by the time you get to it, it might be mush like canned asparagus. So you don't want that to happen. And then lastly, in the recipe, it calls for pounding the chicken out. Now I've got 2 pieces of chicken here that I just brought unpounded. The rest of it is prepped and ready to go. So when you're pounding the chicken, you see with a meat mallet, you see the meat mallet has 2 different sides. It has a spiked side and then it has a flat side. The spiked side is for doing meats like beef or pork or tougher meats that you want to tenderize. You don't want to use this side on something as delicate as chicken because it's going to shred it is what it'll do. So you're going to be using a flat side. I always recommend that if you're going to use chicken on a cutting board of any type, that you lay some plastic film down on the board and then cover that chicken with some plastic film, because should it have the tendency to splatter a little bit or some juices go flying, this actually prevents that from happening, contaminating everything else on your board. So you do it the flat side and you're just basically going to gently tap that out. Okay, and you could maybe double it in size. You're not going to, you're not driving a nail here. You're just gently just patting it out. What this is doing, when you slice a chicken, you might not have a uniform slice. It might be thicker on one end, might be a little thinner on the other end. And what this is going to give you the opportunity is going to give you a uniform cutlet or scallopine. Like scallopine literally translates as thin cut. So what you end up with are pieces like that. So very thin, widespread pieces. Now, like I said, this is an a la minute dish. A la minute means to the minute. In a lot of restaurants, a la minute and saute cooking is all done in saute pans. The sauces are done in the pan with the dish. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. I have a second pan that I'm going to set up where I'm going to saute the vegetables just as a matter of course. And then when we're done, we'll put together on the plate. But everything else is going to end up here. The chicken and the pasta and the sauce, it's all going to end up in this pan here all together at some point to make this dish. So,
Scott, what are you going to saute the vegetables in specifically?
Just a little bit of canola oil.
Okay.
The matter of fat is your choice. Use canola oil, you can use olive oil, you can use butter. If you use butter, if you use olive oil, I recommend you be very careful with the heat. Butter, especially butter, will melt and burn very quickly. Olive oil will do the same thing, especially the more virgin it gets, that you get the extra virgin olive oil, it will get bitter. People don't realize that if you overheat olive oil, it gets bitter. If you want to find out for yourself, do a test. Get some really good, nice extra virgin olive oil, take a pan, take some of it, heat it up to the point where it starts smoking, and then let it cool back down, and then take some that you never even heated up, and then taste the two. And you'll notice that the one that you had in the pan will actually be a little more bitter than this one. Obviously, the more heat, the more bitter it's going to get. People don't realize that. If you're going to use olive oils for cooking, I recommend you using olive canola blends. Canola is a good all-purpose oil all the way around. On the health scale, it's one of the better oils to use versus just a blended vegetable oil. Definitely much better than, say, a peanut oil. Yeah, peanut oils, as good as they taste and as great as they are for Asian cooking, yeah, they're about the top of the list for not healthy oils. So we're gonna take the canola oil, and for the chicken, I'm going to use a blend of canola oil and some European butter. I tend to use European butter when I cook because European butters tend to have a higher fat content and less water and milk solid ratios than commercial American butters. So you get more yield of the fat and a better flavor overall, especially if you're baking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this pan going here. I'm going to adjust my flame, and I'm going to get some heat going. With Saute Cooking, excuse me, with Saute Cooking, the textbook definition, if you're going to a culinary school, sauteing is generally high heat for a very short amount of time and with very small, delicate cuts of meat. So we're talking scallopine, whether it's a chicken scallopine or a veal schnitzel, which is, schnitzel is just the German word for thin cut, or things like seafoods, small cuts of fish, shrimp, scallops. You get a high heat, very short amount of time, and a little bit of oil. And again, we get right back to the a la minute cooking. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get some of this oil going, and notice I don't measure for the most part. So we're going to take my butter, I'm going to take the canola oil, and I'm going to let that heat up, let that melt. So in the recipe, we're talking, I describe taking the chicken cutlet and dredging it in the flour and then shaking off the excess. Now, the reason that we're going to be flouring this is it does two things. One, it's going to help prevent the chicken from sticking. It'll give the chicken a nice coating. And two, it's going to add a little bit of flour to the pan that will help thicken our pan sauce towards the end of the recipe. Okay? But you want to shake that excess off. If you don't, and you got a big glob of flour on your cut of meat, then you're going to end up with a big glob of flour on your meat at the end, and it's going to turn the pan sauce into a goo. So you want to be very careful about that. Also, if you have too much flour on a cut, it can and will eventually burn in the pan. So shaking that off, so you just got a nice coating, if you can see that. And you see our oil starting to smoke a little bit. That's that butter in there. And then we're just going to lay that chicken right in the pan.
Move that olive oil. Can you move it over?
Okay. Just going to lay that in the pan.
Thanks.
Now, I'm kind of running out of a little bit of room here, so I'm just going to use those 4 pieces there. So you notice how they're already starting to get white around the edges? That means they're actually already starting to cook all the way through. So just flip them over. If they haven't browned yet, don't worry about it. They'll start browning in a minute. In the meantime, I'm going to get this one going.
Okay.
Just to get it preheated.
I had a question for you, Scott.
Absolutely.
I've been reading a little more recently about olive oil and the importance of olive oil in our diet and cooking with it. It can be used in so many different ways.
Absolutely.
But they're almost, the different type of olives are like grapes. So they have there's different varietals of grapes. There's different genuses of olives. And you really need to look at the country it's coming from, whether it's a blend, and it's coming from different vintages, so to speak. And a lot of the olive oils that we get in our store today are just a hodgepodge of all kinds of different oils together, or olives together, and it's not really bringing about the healthier components of the oil and the taste and the longevity of it and the shelf life of it.
Now you notice I've added the portobellos in here to start cooking, and I'm going to flip this chicken back off. If you look at it, it's actually starting to brown now. And yes, with the olives, like anything else, especially with the olive oils, one of the things you want to look for in olive oils, for high quality olive oils, is that first pressing. First pressing is always the best, because they will take that olive mash like they do at grape mash when making wines or anything like that. They'll take that olive mash and they will press it again and again and again as much as they can. So you want that first cold pressing is going to be your top rated oils, especially when they're coming from the same orchard, same crop, so you're not getting that blend of oils. And you'll find that a lot with say like balsamic vinegars as well. You wouldn't think about aging with a balsamic vinegar, but the more aged the balsamic vinegar is when it comes from a quality grape, it's like a fine wine. It also is priced like a fine wine. I've had the pleasure of sampling some very, very expensive balsamic vinegars. I mean, we're talking $100 for an 8-ounce bottle. I mean, expensive. Wow. But it was literally like drinking wine. Now I'm adding just about a teaspoon of garlic into the mix here. I'll throw another mushroom in there. My wife loves portobello, so.
You can never have enough mushrooms, at least in our house.
Honestly, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and one of Pennsylvania's most notable agricultural crops is button mushrooms. And I was never a fan of mushrooms growing up as a kid. And then when I started going to school and working, while I was going into school, I got introduced to wild mushrooms, particularly portobellos. And with portobellos, I absolutely fell in love with them. I realized you can grill them and put them on a nice ciabatta roll with some roasted red bell pepper and other ingredients, and it was like eating a steak.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It was wonderful. Okay, so now the chicken is pretty much cooked. The mushrooms are pretty much cooked. It doesn't take long. Now I'm going to add the Madeira. Now, anytime you add alcohol to a hot pan, I always recommend taking that pan away from the fire. Now, Madeira is a fortified wine, which means it has a higher alcohol content. Okay, now the alcohol is pretty much burned out. You don't want the alcohol in your recipe. You want it to cook out. You want that flame to burn itself out. The alcohol is gone. Alcohol actually has a flavor, and it has a very bitter flavor. So you want to cook that out and just get what's left, and that's the sweet Madeira flavor. So I added that in there. That's cooking down a bit. I'm going to add a little bit of the beef stock. And we're going to let that cook for a little bit. Now, I did not season my chicken, so I'm going to add a little bit of pepper now. Now, I'm not going to add any salt because in the recipe I have to use a beef base. I use the brand that you can buy from the store. You can buy Better Than Bouillon, is pretty much the closest you can come to a commercial beef soup base or chicken base or vegetable base. It's a good quality product, but you have to be careful because beef or soup bases and especially the bouillon cubes are loaded with sodium, and I mean loaded. So if you're using it, use it sparingly and do not add salt to your recipe until the very end, until you taste it. Because if you add salt before you taste it after using a bouillon-based stock or broth, you may be very disappointed with what you end up with. I'm not a salt freak by nature, so I tend to cut back on the salt. But my goal is that when somebody sits down and eats my food, that they don't pick up a salt shaker. So you have to know how much is in what you're using and got to taste it. So that's cooking down a little bit.
Scott was using Madeira, and actually Madeira has a prominent role in the United States. It was a prominent drink, the Madeira wine from Madeira Island, province of Portugal. They drank that, according to Mr. Adams and his wife, Abigail Adams. It was the wine of choice in the First Continental Congress in 1774. Right. Yeah, and it also played a prominent role in the signing of the Declaration of Independence for the United States.
Awesome.
Played a very big role in that with our founding fathers.
So we have a history lesson as well.
Yeah.
And I'm a history buff, so I dig that. You get food and history together, that's a good thing. Actually, it was one of the most interesting classes that I had when I was in college. Actually, was my social studies class. It was actually called Food in History. And it basically broke down the world in the regions and talked about how food was a major player in all the major events that happened in our recorded history in the last 300, 400, 500 years. So that was a very interesting class. I enjoyed it a lot, so I kind of dig that. Okay, so now this is cooking down now to the point where it's flavor blended enough. Now I'm going to take my heavy cream, add that right in there. Now, heavy cream is a wonderful thing. Not only does it add fat, which fat causes flavor to adhere to your taste buds, heavy cream is also one of the standard culinary thickeners. You know, unlike milk, which if you heat it up too much, it can break and then gets all curdly. Heavy cream, you can bring that to a boil, literally, and let it cook down more than 50%, and all it does is get thicker and thicker and thicker. And this is actually part of the process that you're doing when you make things like custards and things like that. But for making pan sauces, you can add heavy cream to a pan and let it cook down a little bit without the worry of it breaking. If it does break, then you really did cook it way down, and it's a very rare thing. But you can let it come to a boil, as you can see here. Well, you can or can't. And it will just reduce. And as it reduces, it tends to thicken. So we end up with a nice, creamy, light brown sauce. And I'm going to turn the heat off of that. And what we're going to do now is turn the heat back up on that a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of oil to this pan. This pan's actually heating up through the handle. So now, again, you know, the asparagus has been blanched. So you're not really cooking the asparagus as much as you are bringing it back up to temperature and maybe caramelizing it a little bit on a high heat. Now, the asparagus was a little bit wet, so that water that hits that hot oil, that's going to splatter a little bit. So you have to be careful about that, because that splatter can ignite. And you don't want to be standing right here, especially if you're at home and you've got long hair and it ignites.
Especially facial hair, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you know, that hair turns into a wick and woof. I myself have long hair, but I keep it tucked down the back of my jacket while I'm working. So just heat that up. I'm just going to add a little bit of pepper to that. And maybe just a splash of that pink salt. Add these tomatoes. Just going to let that cook down a little bit. In the meantime, take some of this and get it out of the way here. Pasta is one of those things that for some reason we always cook too much of.
Yeah, that's pretty commonplace in my house. Too
Yeah,
much pasta
we cook too much
and
of
too much
it.
bread.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden we realize we got all these leftover containers in our refrigerator of pasta. So all I'm going to do is put that back in the pan and let that heat up for a little bit. Just to bring this up, like I said, this pasta is already cooked. And again, fresh pasta only takes just a couple minutes in a pan. Turn that off. So now, what we're going to do, these pans have gotten a little hot. suppose you can get me a napkin or a towel, paper towel.
Hey, there's one right by my book bag. If you want to grab one.
All right. So lots of mushrooms, lots of sauce.
And that's perfectly okay.
I'm gonna make a mess here.
No, that's all right.
You know, we tell the people in the kitchen that the inside the rim of the plate belongs to the cooks. Outside belongs to the server.
That's interesting. I like that. I'm gonna tell it to my daughter.
So I'm just gonna take that pan sauce and dump that all over that. Woohoo! Yeah.
I know you still have the parsley left. Is that just going to be mainly a garnish that's going to go on top?
Yeah, you can. And I think in the recipe I said you can add the parsley in the cooking process, or you can just put on that. But you see what I'm talking about here?
Nice.
Is how that parsley just falls apart like that. It just falls apart. If you don't rinse it out, it's just going to clump and fall. So what you end up with is a very, very beautiful savory pasta dish.
Looks
so
fantastic.
That is your chicken scallopini.
And smells fantastic as well.
With Madeira cream sauce, portobello mushrooms, and if we get the chance in the very near future to have a night with the chef at the Lost Oak Winery, it usually happens on the last Wednesday of the month, so keep an eye on the website, and as soon as we're allowed to do it, we will get one on the menu. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Scott. Appreciate it. That was fantastic and outstanding. Yeah, it smells great, looks great. And we do have a couple announcements, and I think Chelsea has them, and I'll pass them over here. We do open up again this Friday from what? We're going 1 to 8 now? 1 to 8. So we're going to be at 25% capacity. That includes the event center events as well as down at the tasting room. Now, our main tasting room will not be open, but we will be open in our patio will be open. And of course, our courtyard area will be open, but only a certain amount of tables will be open. Like I said, we have to go to that 25% rule to where only so many people can be allowed on the grounds. And we'll still be doing curbside pickup, so you can come in and pick up for members, and for non-members, you can still do curbside pickup. The only thing is, we are not selling by the glass, correct? We're only selling by the bottle, and we are handing out plastic cups, correct? Is that? And you can consume on site, but once we reach that the number of people, then we're going to have to close it up, or not close it up, but not anybody else in. But you can still purchase wine, take it to go, and we do have our hike and bike trail, which is still open out here, which is 30 acres. Right by our production facility, and you are allowed to take wine and go drink over there, responsibly, of course. Okay. Say that again.
Tuesdays are 65 plus only.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, you probably just heard that. Tuesdays are 65 plus only. But we do have a $10 flat rate shipping right now. We do free shipping if you get 7 bottles or more. We'll do free shipping. And then also this Friday, I think we're doing another Lost Oak Live with Gene Estes, the owner, and he's going to be talking about his specialty, his baby, if you will, his Viognier, which is always fantastic and really, really good. It's one of my favorite white wines that we produce here at Lost Oak. Like I said, we're opening it to a limited capacity only on the patio and in the courtyard, 1 to 8. So hopefully we'll see you, and hopefully we'll be seeing Scott and Sandy here soon in the future, soon enough, if you will. But like everything else that's going on in the nation and in our state, we have to make it gradual, and we have to make it safe for you, the customer, or our clients, but also for the employees, for us as well. And what we'll probably be doing down the tasting room is we're probably opening up our French doors, and we'll just be selling wine through the patio from the tasting room to the customers. And we'll have everything laid out for you and explained to you. And if we're proactive, so if you want to bring your masks, that's great. But we are going to have people spaced out accordingly to meet regulations here with Burleson and in the state. But if you want to bring your mask, you're more than welcome to do that. We're fine with that. Anything else? Oh, a little bit more trivia, real quick, right?
Yeah.
Back in the mid-1600s, colonial time, earlier colonial time, but mid-1600s, it went into effect in the colonial times as well, is that European goods were not allowed to go into the U.S. or to the colonial America, right?
Correct.
They had to be on a British ship, come from a British port, and of course, pay British taxes. So that was the only way we could get wine from Europe. So, but there was a loophole. Madeira was a loophole. Province of Portugal. Madeira was not included in that pact. So that's the reason why our colonial and our colonial Americans and founding fathers and women liked their Madeira, because they could get it from Madeira and from Portugal without having to pay taxes or fees. They basically traded corn and cotton and other merchandise and goods to get their Madeira. So that's why it was prevalent during those times.
Awesome.
Yeah, there you go. A little trivia.
Like
for
I
you
say,
today.
if it's free, it's for me.
Well, thank you so much again, Scott. We appreciate it.
Appreciate you
and
guys.
hope to see you soon. Good night from Lost Oak family. Take care and be safe.